Welcome to our session of Getting to the Music of Ernest Bloch. And it's wonderful today to get to the music for trumpet and trombone. And we have Aaron Klaus and Nathaniel Lease with us. Aaron is an independent scholar based in the Washington, D.C. area. His research focuses on the interplay between Jewish music and Jewish identity from the mid-19th century through to the present. Nathaniel is an adjunct instructor of music at Hagerstown Community College and Penn State Mont Alto. He's also the former principal trombonist of the Loudon Symphony Orchestra. In addition to his teachings, Nate has a busy schedule as a freelance orchestral, solo band, and chamber musician in the greater DC area. So we're really delighted to have you with us, and I'll hand over to Aaron Klaus.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I want to give a special thank you, of course, to Geraldine for organizing this, as always, but also to Nathaniel. Between the two of us, I'm the Bloch guy. Nathaniel is a newcomer, so I really appreciate his being able to jump in and learn a little bit about Bloch, and about these two pieces. Now, Bloch was there's not a lot of composers out there who you would say are composers for brass, but Bloch was certainly not one of them. But he did write these two pieces, Proclamation for Trumpet and Orchestra, which I've researched and performed, and prior to that, his Symphony for Trombone and Orchestra. So I thought we would dive a little bit into them. Let's see. So I want to start by giving you a bit of a background to how these two pieces came about. Samuel Lederman, who was a wealthy labor leader in Chicago who deeply loved Bloch's music, as many of you certainly know, held a festival in his honor, in honor of his 70th birthday. And I believe that in Lederman's mind, Bloch, I believe that Lederman was, in Bloch's mind, the first Jew to show a serious interest in and appreciation of his music. I think it's entirely plausible that Bloch returned to Jewish themes in his compositions after the festival, out of concern for his legacy, and Lederman's enthusiasm in spearheading this festival surely gave him a sense of accomplishment. And I think a prime example of this would be his suite Hebraic in 1951. Bloch's correspondence with Lederman over several years following the festival sheds light on why Bloch would decide to dedicate Proclamation to Lederman when he composed the piece, even though the two men had only met for the first time in 1950. Their letters are numerous and affectionate in tone. For example, on March 17, 1951, Bloch wrote to Lederman regarding their friendship, quote, "At last there is one man on this continent who feels and knows what the effort of a whole life has been and means, and whose faith and energy will prevail after me when I am gone." And then later that year, on November 30th, 1951, Bloch wrote to Lederman, he says, "I cannot find words to thank you adequately, but I will thank you, I hope, in a better way for me than words someday in music." And of course, Proclamation would be the result of that. I'm going to ask Nathaniel to share the slides. Just a few photos to show their friendship. This photograph was taken by Irving Alter on November 29th, 1950, most likely at Chicago Sinai congregation. Next slide. Probably from the same event. We don't know. So Lederman is on the left, and we don't know who the other people are. And next slide, please. That's the two of them once again. Photo taken by Philip J. Weinstein on November 3rd, 1950. There was a banquet held in his honor at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Chicago. And one more. And this is likely on December 5th, 1950. Ann Pillar Dewey was the photographer, and location was unknown. So moving on to mid 1953, I'm going to hand it off to Nate, and here is the next photo of the next person in our story.
Sure. So like Aaron said, I guess I will go ahead and take over a little bit now. So yeah, about mid 1953, Bloch received a letter from the eminent, though now long forgotten trombonist Davis Schumann, who was on faculty at the Juilliard School at the time, asking him whether he had ever considered writing a work for the trombone. Now, having great admiration for Bloch's music, Schumann was taking the liberty of sending some recordings that he had hoped might stimulate the composer to write music for the trombone. And he would be most honored to commission Bloch for such a work. This is where we start getting our symphony for the trombone and orchestra. So after hearing the records and impressed by the beautiful sonorities of the instrument, Bloch wrote to Schumann that he would write a composition for him. Now, I want to give a little background here on Davis Schumann. Again, he's nowadays, the trombone world considers him, unfortunately, long forgotten. So he was born in 1912 in Ukraine, and his family was kind of forced out due to pogroms. He was a pioneer in solo trombone, commissioning works from Persichetti, Milhaud, and of course Bloch. He was pretty much the first American trombonist to consider himself a little bit more of a soloist than an orchestral player. A lot of people at the time considered themselves orchestral players, but Bloch actually was the first one to put on a real, quote unquote, trombone solo recital. Now, were there others? Absolutely. Most notably is Arthur Pryor, but Pryor played flashy stuff, or we just stole from the cello world, which, to be honest, we still do. But Bloch really wanted to kind of pioneer the instrument as a true solo instrument. Now, we also didn't know that the Paris conservatories were making a bunch of different pieces like that.
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. Just to clarify, you said Bloch
No, go ahead.
Is interested in making the trombone a solo instrument. Did you mean
sorry, Schumann was, yes.
Sure.
Thank you for your clarification.
No problem.
Oh, dad brain. So yes, so Schumann was interested in making it a solo. Now, once again, just to pick back up, the Paris Conservatory did have basically every year a contest piece or a competition piece that they would perform, but it hadn't made its way over to the States yet, so we were not fully aware of them. Well, I wasn't alive, but I mean, American trombonists at the time weren't aware of them. He initially got his degree realistically in civil engineering, just in case trombone didn't work out. Luckily for him, he then got to perform for like the Boston Symphony, or what was at the time the Boston Symphony, and then eventually kind of around the Juilliard areas, the New York Philharmonic and whatnot. So he did do his graduate studies at Juilliard and later replaced his teacher as the trombone professor there. And that's how Bloch and Schumann met. Suzanne Bloch taught there. So Kushner writes that Schumann requested a work for trombone and that Bloch was, quote, impressed by the trombone's wide-ranging sonorities. So this is I believe either a quote or probably a letter from Suzanne Bloch that says, quote, in mid-1953, Bloch received a letter from the eminent trombonist Davis Schumann on the faculty of Juilliard School, asking him whether he had ever considered writing a work for this instrument. Having great admiration for Bloch's music, Schumann was taking the liberty, of course, of sending some recordings that he hoped might stimulate the composer to write music for the trombone, and he would be most honored to commission Bloch for such a work. After hearing the records and impressed by the beautiful sonority of the instrument, Bloch wrote to Schumann that he would write a composition for him. As Schumann enjoyed relating, he began to receive short notes saying that the work was, quote, in progress until one day in June 1954, without advance warning, Schumann had a letter saying the music was being sent to him. Needless to say, David Schumann at once asked Bloch what would be his fee. The answer was that there was no fee because he wanted to write the work and was dedicating it to him, which you should be able to see that here in a little bit. This resulted in Bloch's receiving year after year the most marvelous fruit cakes baked by Mrs. Schumann, annual gifts delighting my parents both gastronomically and spiritually. And I believe here I must go to the next slide. So 1 second. Of course, it doesn't move. Now will it move? There we go. Okay, so these are a couple of, on the left-hand side is our provisional sketches. I believe this.
If you're sharing, we're not seeing the image.
That's great. How about now?
You can see it? Oh, I can't see. Oh, there we go. Now it is. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay, sorry. Apparently it just took a little bit to show up. So, all right. So now that we have that sorted out. So on the left-hand side here are some provisional sketches of the first movement of the piece. And then on the right-hand side, hopefully it's not mirrored at all for you all. It shouldn't be. But on the right-hand side is more the final sketches of the first movement. So everybody seeing the next thing come up, it should look slightly different. Just a head shake, Aaron, if you can see the next thing. Cool. Okay. So on the left-hand side, again, we have our first sketches of the second movement, followed by some final sketches of the second movement. And then we have on the left-hand side sketches of the third movement, followed by the final sketch of the third movement. Now, Aaron, would you like me to stop sharing the screen, or do you want me to put it on a particular picture? Because I think the next thing is the actual recordings.
Great question. Yeah, you can stop for now.
Okay. And then I'll let you take over.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's kind of the background. That is the background of what led to Trombone Symphony. In June of 1954, Bloch told Lederman that he just completed his Trombone Symphony and would like to dedicate a new short work to him. And all of this correspondence, we mentioned we're both from the DC area. I was able to go down to the Library of Congress, and all of it's quite well organized there, all of the letters. In September of 54, Alexander Brood writes to Bloch asking for new music. He says, our thought would be a short work for clarinet and small orchestra or string orchestra, or a similar work for trumpet. And they do remark that there is not much literature for these instruments, which Nathaniel and I can both certainly attest to. In October, then, Bloch writes back. He does not know when he could do that, but he does offer his newly written Trombone Symphony. The next few letters talk about royalties, details of the publishing, the premiere. This is, as far as I can tell, the start of a relationship between the Brood brothers publishing. I guess it was with Schirmer before, and they were slow, and he was getting older, is what he said. So Trombone Symphony, indeed, was the first work of his that they published. And then between March and May of 1955, Bloch finally got around to writing Proclamation, which was in response to letters from the previous year, of course. He decided to write for the trumpet because he became, quote, stimulated by the sound of brass and attracted to the brilliance of the trumpet, says Lewinsky Dijon, while composing the Trombone Symphony. Actually, if you could show the next slide, we do have some sketches from Proclamation. These again from Library of Congress. I think that looks like Trombone Symphony. So that should be the next slide. There we go. Yeah, again, very grateful to the Library of Congress for providing all of these. In August of 55, Irving Brood informed Bloch that they have confirmed that Leopold Stokowski will premiere the Trombone Symphony with Schumann as the soloist. in April of 56. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. He then says that Stokowski would also premiere Proclamation, but he doesn't have any details. Irving Brood tells Bloch in December of 1955 that Proclamation will be premiered by Stokowski in February of 1956, but subsequent letters say that it was never recorded. I did reach out to the Houston Symphony Archives. They have no record of this concert ever having taken place, nor does Lewinsky-Dijon. And there does not appear to be any mention of this performance in the Houston Chronicle or the Houston Post. So why this performance did not occur, or why this performance occurred with no record of it, remains a mystery. But contrary to what Lewinsky-Dijon say, I was able to find, I was proud to be able to find that the first documented performance of Proclamation took place on February 15th, 1956, as part of an all-block program aired by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, played by a CBC orchestra and conducted by Alexander Brott. The CBC Times and Globe and Mail announced this premiere, but neither publication indicates who the soloist was. Irving Brood does mention this performance in his letter to Bloch in March of 1956. The Brood brothers did send him a recording, but Bloch did not mince words. Quote, "I hope you did not hear it. You would bite your fingers for publishing such a horror. Believe me, it has no connection with my work. A disgrace, certainly not Stokowski." Certainly did not mince words. I'll pass it quickly back on to Nate to talk about the premiere of Trombone Symphony, and then I'll share a little more on Proclamation, and we will get into the works themselves.
Sure.
Probably stop screen sharing at this point.
Yes, sir. All right. So, April 4th, 1956, the Trombone Symphony did premiere, with Stokowski conducting the Houston Symphony Orchestra and with Davis Schumann as the soloist in a children's concert. I don't really know if any trombone premiere had ever been done as part of a children's concert before, so that's kind of cool. I like that. But Mark Paul Babbitt writes, quote, "This complex and colorful work caps what was probably the high point in Schumann's solo career. It had a lasting presence in the trombone repertoire, probably truthfully up until probably about the 80s or 90s, when other composers started to go about, and of course with Christian Lindbergh, who we don't talk about in here, but he's right after Schumann. He would be the next, what we would call a true trombone career soloist. And then later we have some other individuals such as, why can I not think of his name? Well, Bruce Tychinski, my old teacher, was one, Matt Neese, and so on and so forth. But yeah, so that's a little bit about the premiere. Kick it back over here to Aaron, so that way he can talk to you a little bit about what's coming up next.
So I should know how to pronounce this name. I don't know if it's Ruth Burgess or Burgess. Anybody know off? I believe connected with the Brood brothers. Anyway, she informs Bloch that the Little Orchestra Society will perform Proclamation 15 times in the remainder of 1956. However, it appears that the American premiere actually took place on November 18th, 1957 in New York's Town Hall, with Thomas Sherman directing the Little Orchestra Society and Robert Nagel as the soloist. Robert Nagel is a legend in the trumpet world, and I was very lucky to have a brief email exchange with him about 10 months before he passed away at the age of 91. He says, quote, "I found the rich orchestral accompaniments for both works very attractive. I hardly ever turned down an opportunity to perform a solo trumpet work. I performed Proclamation several times. For a short work, it has a nice contrast between fanfare-like passages and broad lyric melody, which attracted me to the piece." So, we'd like to get into these pieces and do a little bit of listening. So just a little bit of background. Both Proclamation and Trombone Symphony are rich in what could be called his traditional Jewish markers, the augmented seconds and fourths, open fifths, and so on. I do want to highlight his use of open fifths in particular as a springboard for the rising fifth melodic motif heard throughout each work, reminiscent certainly of a shofar call, no doubt taking advantage of his first use of brass instruments and solo roles. As I mentioned, I believe that Samuel Lederman was, in Bloch's mind, the first Jew to show a serious interest in and appreciation of his music, and therefore he decided to write these pieces in his overtly Jewish style out of concern for his legacy, but also reflecting his lifelong struggle with national identity that we all know about. Nevertheless, as I offer descriptions of these works by Suzanne Bloch and David Kushner, I want to acknowledge that Bloch's Jewish style could just as easily be referred to simply as the Bloch style. I would turn it over to Nate to read Suzanne Bloch's words on the Trombone Symphony. We'll intersperse that with each of the 3 moments with a recording. I think we'll play maybe snippets. Nathaniel, I'll let you decide how much of it you want to play. And if there's time and interest at the end, we could play the whole thing or certainly send out the link. The recording I chose of Trombone Symphony is 1976, which does appear to be the first one. And it is the one played by the Portland Youth Philharmonic. The conductor is Jacob Avshalomov. And the soloist is Howard Prince. You'll see on the slide it says Harold Prince, but it was Howard. And likewise, the Proclamation recording I have is, to the best of my knowledge, is one of 2 recordings made in 1963, one of which I suppose was technically the first. Not sure which, but it is of the Louisville Orchestra, conducted by Robert Whitney, with Leon Rapier as the soloist. And the other one does have Robert Nagel as the soloist, with the Aspen Festival Orchestra, conducted by Robert Suskind, although I was unable to find a digital version of the album, which I have it on a CD over there, but can't share that. Anyway, so I'll turn it over to Nate to talk about, or to share Suzanne Bloch's words on Trombone Symphony with a recording from 1976.
Yep. Thanks, Aaron. So I'll probably go ahead and mention this too. I know we talked about it a little bit beforehand. With the first and the third movement kind of being so short, I probably will play those probably in their entirety, and we'll just play snippets, just like maybe the first couple of minutes of the second movement, just because that's his long sonata allegro form movement. So anyway, let's start out with this is from Suzanne Bloch in Creative Spirit about this work. So, quote, "This work, as the title suggests, places the trombone as an integral part of the orchestra, yet rising above it not as in a concerto, but more as an obbligato. Its main theme, unifying the 3 movements, typifies Bloch's treatment of many works. Quoting the music critic Paul Shahara, its overall structure suggests a single extended arc. It begins as a lament, progresses as a heroic struggle, and ends calmo in resignation." So the first and last movements are relatively short and serve as an introduction and conclusion to the massive middle movement, which is an expanded sonata allegro tradition of Beethoven. And I'll just talk about that too, and then I'll share it here in a second. So Kushner elaborates, the obbligato trombone, fulfilling a similar role to that of the piano in the Concerto Grosso No. 1 and the cello in Voice in the Wilderness, enters after an opening orchestral maestoso, in effect a cry of lament, with its augmented fourth, block rhythm, i.e. Scottish snap or Lombardic rhythm, and prominent triplet figure that serve as a unifying motif in each of the movements. The solo instrument immediately recalls the opening Native American motif of the violin concerto, but in this work, the weeping and wailing environment, heightened by the celeste, tam-tam, and harp, suggests the earlier Jewish cycle. So I will play a little bit of the first movement here. I feel like there was something I was going to mention. I don't remember what it was. Oh, the artist, Howard Prince. So Aaron, I believe, based on my research, Aaron is correct on this as well. I believe this is the first recording that I could find even as well. So Howard Prince is listed, ironically, as the solo bass trumpet from the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. However, of course, he played the trombone because that's what we do, is we have way too many instruments. So let me go ahead and share this real fast and see if I can get the video going again here. So make sure I have share sound. Wonderful. And I move it over. Come on. There we go. All right. So this should be, is this, Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the entirety of it or just the first movement?
No, each movement's on separate slides.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to double check. Thank you.
No problem. And it is Howard Prince, and so I'm not sure whoever made this video, but anyhow.
Yeah, I don't, they tried their best. So there's the first movement. Now, of course, Howard's tone in itself is a little bit more what we would consider an American style. And this is something I meant to mention earlier as well. Schumann, who commissioned the piece, as you saw in the photo, first off, played on a kind of a weird slide. So normally, I, of course, have 4 trombones. None of them are out around me right now. So I can't show you what it actually, is supposed to look like. But it just kind of went down at an angle. It was supposed to be more ergodynamic, especially for younger players, but weird. Now, his style of playing was much more pointed, harsher attacks, items like that. So this is definitely not what the premiere sounded like with Schumann playing it. His, of course, is Howard Prince's version. Now, if we move to the second movement, which if I get the strange feeling if I push the arrow, it's going to start playing again. But we're going to see what happens. Did anything happen to anybody? I cannot tell if anything happened. This is fantastic. One moment, please.
Start playing it and see what comes out.
Oh, good point. Beginning. Okay. This might be the second movement. Yes, it just changed to 11. Okay. YouTube is weird. Sorry. So, on the second movement, Suzanne Bloch writes, quote, "There's much unrest in this movement in which conflicting themes and moods are juxtaposed and transformed in skillful counterpoint." And Kushner adds to it that the second movement, labeled Agitato, introduces several diverse themes, and these are presented in an expanded sonata form. And I'll probably play maybe the first 2 minutes of the movement. The movement in itself is around 8 minutes, so if we have time, we can go back and listen to it in its entirety. But for ease, we'll listen to just the first couple of minutes of this. So let's see if I can get this to work. I know. Interesting place to end it, but that's where we're going to stop it for right now, just because I don't want to take up too much time. But you might have also noticed as well, while you were listening to it, some of the something that really the trombone and technically string instruments can only really do, which is the glissando. It's written, I know that twice you heard it there. I know it's written at least 2 to 4 more times throughout this movement as well. And it's actually, it adds a nice tasteful kind of, it's a tasteful gliss. There are composers, especially trombone composers of this era, that will add glisses simply because the trombone can do it and not for like an actual purpose. This has a purpose. This has a purpose. It's very tasteful. It goes in with the obligato feeling that's happening. It's very, very, very nice. And then if we move to the last movement, there we go. Okay, so then of the final movement, or Allegro deciso, sorry, my pronunciation sometimes is terrible, begins with an orchestral outburst as though the despair in the opening movements was returning. But by degrees, the pain subsides, previous material return in transformed, less threatening colors, and the symphony concludes quietly. Alcocher adds to Suzanne Bloch's description, the compressed finale recalls themes from earlier portions of the symphony. Further, the exotic touches found in the earlier works, such as the inclusion of the celeste and harp, will elicit a smile of recognition from those steeped in. I'm definitely going to mispronounce this word. I believe it's Blochiana. Sure, I'm just going to go with that. As in other products of the organ years, the final calmo, which we actually heard also at the beginning of the first movement, it said do, 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 do. That little thing again comes back, referring to themes exposed previously, brings the work to a very quiet close. So here is the final movement if I'm on the right slide. Right. Um, so just an interesting tidbit as well. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of trombone literature, especially pre the 1950s, 1940s, was just stuff that we stole from the cellos, for lack of better terminology. We also kind of stole it from violins, we stole it from oboes, we stole it from bassoons. This is one of the first pieces, or this is one of the early works that was written specifically for the trombone with the trombone in mind. But nowadays, it's actually called the Symphony for Trombone or Cello and Orchestra. So they actually, ironically, stole something from us this time. But that is the last thing I want to say about that. And I will hand it over to Aaron to talk a little bit about the proclamation. And Aaron, just let me know if you'd like me to stop sharing for a little bit while you talk, or if you just want me to go ahead and move over to your slide. You let me know.
Why don't you go ahead and move on over? So I'll just share then in creative spirit on Proclamation. Suzanne Bloch writes, quote, after having composed his symphony for trombone, stimulated by his inner hearing of brass sonorities, Bloch wrote the Proclamation for trumpet. As the title suggests, the main theme is indeed a proclamation in which the Blochian augmented fourth shapes its personality. In one movement, it is characterized by uneven rhythms, with the sound of the trumpet never overshadowed by the orchestra, clear and strong until the end. It is a brief work lasting only 7 minutes, which, I was thinking about too. We can talk a little bit about my theory as to why this is not more often performed is because it's just too short. It's a lovely piece. I wish it was longer. It's really more suitable. I think any orchestra would have trouble programming it when they're looking for maybe a 20-minute long concerto. But I think it's lovely. The piano reduction is wonderful. And I was thrilled to be able to play it several times on recitals. Kushner writes, quote, Proclamation makes its declarations directly and without any attempt at nuance. The solo trumpet indeed makes it clear that it is the star of the occasion and not to be subordinated to the orchestra. The elements combined here are block staples, augmented fourths, major sevenths, uneven rhythms, and shofar calls. The latter, in particular, may have had a special meaning for those of Jewish heritage who, like Lederman, had attended the Chicago Bloch Fest. But as these traits occur in many of the composer's works, with or without Jewish references, they may be safely assumed to have merged into a uniquely identifying set of markers for what had, by now, become known as the Bloch style. As I mentioned briefly, this is, to the best of my knowledge, one of 2 recordings made in 1963. The other one of the Louisville Orchestra, conducted by Robert Whitney, with Leon Rapier as the soloist. Excuse me, this is the one that we will be listening to. And here it is, Proclamation. I think you can stop sharing now. I'm always so struck in recordings from this era. No one would ever play with such wild vibrato anymore, but that was the style. And that's pretty much all we got.
Aaron, thank you so much. Thank you and Nate for a really riveting presentation, which beautifully prepared and introducing us to such interesting works that are not often performed. I wonder, Greg, if you're there, whether you've ever probed them in Bloch festivals, or we would welcome any other comments that you'd like to make or questions. So, you can put up a real or a virtual hand. We're an intimate group, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Malcolm Singer.
Hello, nice to see everyone. Thank you very much for a super presentation. When I was a young music student, we played the Gordon Jacob trombone concerto. Must have been in the late 60s. And I think that was written in the mid 50s. I wonder if Bloch knew the Gordon Jacob or vice versa, or whether there was any connection. I think it was written for Dennis Wick, who was the LSO's principal trombonist. It's a wonderful piece. I don't think Gordon was Jewish. Alex Knapp will probably know. I don't think he was Jewish, despite his name.
No, that's a great. I will be completely truthful with you here. I am not 100% sure of the answer if Gordon Jacob and if Bloch knew each other. But yeah, I mean, everything else you said was right. It was written for Dennis Wick, who was the LSO principal trombonist at the time. But yeah, I do not know that for sure. If you want complete honesty, that's a great question, and something that would be something I should look up. That would actually be interesting, because
Alex Knapp might know more than we know. I don't know.
Alex, yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't help with that one, because I don't really know if there was a connection between Gordon Jacob and Bloch. There may well have been. I think there were quite a lot of connections across Atlantic between various composers. But I don't know the Gordon Jacob trombone concerto, so that it would be interesting to see if stylistically there were any points in common. But I'm not aware of it.
Not really. I would say it's more of a British. It's a wonderful piece. I remember it from my youth orchestra days with a very young Dudley Bright, who became the principal trombonist of the LSO a decade or two later. I remember him playing it as a student. It's a super piece, beautiful slow movement. But it's just interesting that in the mid-50s, these two men were both writing really rather beautiful pieces for trombone and orchestra. I know nothing more about. I'm a string player, so I'm no help.
The 50s really were, in many ways, our heyday for solo brass. I mean, there are so many composers who wrote solo works for trumpet as well. Certainly, no one super familiar, but it's not. This was right around the time that some of the staples, the Ken Cannon Sonata, the Halsey Stevens Sonata, like the very much staples of the trumpet solo rep.
I think it needs to be said that although Bloch only composed these two works for solo brass instruments, trumpet, trombone, brass instruments figured very, very significant in many of his large orchestral works, and have often been described as inspired by the blowing of the shofar and all the different calls that there are, and how these were introduced, particularly during the jury cycle in the in the sort of around 1912 to 1916, works composed then. And so therefore, I mean, Bloch was actually very familiar with brass writing, and it was, really quite a prominent feature of his style, even in the early days. It would have been interesting to see if he'd composed more works for perhaps even for French horn. But I know there were no solo works, as far as I know, for French horn. Just wanted to mention one or two other things. You referred to the fact that this particular piece, the Trombone Symphony, is also optionally for cello. And I'm sure many of you will be aware that this Trombone Symphony has been recorded with cello by Raphael Waldfisch in a fairly new recording, I think, over the last couple of years. And he mentioned that he did have to make one or two minor alterations to the trombone part when playing it on the cello to make it more idiomatically successful, to make it more suitable for the cello. But basically, it's the same work. And that's something that I think hasn't been recorded before. This recording by Raphael Waldfisch. I think it's interesting to note that many of Bloch's works in the 1950s are stylistically very similar to each other. So it's not only that they're similar in style, they're also similar in terms of his preference of chords, his preference for harmonic progressions, and his preference particular motifs and melodies, which are created then from the accumulation of these motifs. And sometimes one can be perhaps a little confused as to which work a particular section comes from, because it is so similar to other works composed during that same sort of period. And I think that by this time, it was very clear that Bloch's style was something that had really crystallized into something totally recognizable. Even after a few bars, or measures, one could really hear the Bloch style throughout. Just one comment I'd like to make about Bloch's comment that Samuel Lederman was the first Jew who'd shown a real interest in Bloch's music. Now, did I hear that quote correctly? I think I've seen it written down, but it may very well be that Bloch said that in a moment of great enthusiasm for Samuel Lederman, who certainly did a fantastic job with the Bloch's 70th birthday celebrations in Chicago in 1950. But I don't think it's quite fair, because although there were many benefactors and patrons of Bloch's music who came from outside of the Jewish community over the decades, it's also true that many people who supported Bloch over the decades, right from the time that he first went to America in 1916, right onwards, many of them were Jewish. And I think sometimes Bloch was a little bit ambivalent about the response to his music in the Jewish community, and felt that he wasn't appreciated sufficiently. Whereas he did immediately appreciate Samuel Lederman as being a great supporter and a really good friend. And it seems that it was very a fitting kind of response that Bloch made by composing a piece of music for trumpet. It's not usually regarded as part of the Jewish works, the Trumpet Proclamation. And yet now I think people are beginning to think that maybe it could be categorized if one looks at the melodic motifs and the various stylistic issues in that particular piece that do link it to some of the earlier works that are part of Bloch's Jewish oeuvre. So just a few comments.
Yeah, I think that the first Jew to show appreciation, that was my interpretation, I think. But maybe the quote you're referring to, he said, "At last there is one man on this continent who feels and knows what the effort of a whole life has been." I cannot find words that then so on and so forth. But very good points. And thank you.
Well, thank you. Malcolm again.
Yeah, as a composer, of course, the only question I really want to ask is about money. How come he wrote such a big piece without a commission fee? Was he not being commissioned at this time, or was he comfortable enough to write without needing to have a fee? Or had he gone so out of fashion no one was commissioning him? I mean, it's it's a sizable piece with a big orchestra. It was quite a lot of work, I can tell you.
I have no idea. It's a great question. And maybe Alexander, yeah.
Or just to say, my understanding of it, just having looked at the sort of the correspondence around that, was that he was just really sort of overwhelmed with gratitude for such a fine, sorry, fine piece, and that when, excuse me, when it was suggested, there was some discussion about, financial issues. The trombonist, David Schumann, said that wait a minute, I'm just trying to get this right in my head. Bloch offered a fee for it, and David Schumann said no. No, wait a minute. I'm sorry. I'm getting a bit confused. Which way round was it? Was it that Bloch offered a fee, or was it that David Schumann offered a fee?
I believe Schumann, if I'm remembering correctly, asked basically, what would the fee for this be, and Bloch said no charge.
Right. Yes. Now I understand. Yeah. I think it was because Bloch was really grateful for such a fine piece, and as a gesture. I think that was the understanding, and so therefore David Schumann, yes, and his wife gave annual gifts of cakes and fruit and all sorts of nice things, I think possibly around Christmas time. I'm sorry about my earlier confusion. I apologize for that.
Oh, Jeremy.
Geraldine, can't hear you. Can't hear you.
You can't.
Oh, now.
Because I muted myself. Okay, so maybe this is a moment we should just listen to the whole of the trombone concerto as we ease ourselves out of this wonderful presentation that we've all enjoyed so much. So thank you so much to Aaron and to Nate. Next month on the 17th, we're going to hear from Jenny Lynn, who has recorded all the works for piano and orchestra. And she'll be talking to us about that. And that's on the 17th of March. So hope to see you then. And thank you once more. And now, Nathaniel, will you share and play us out with the whole of the trombone concerto?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let me get back into here. Share. Back up a few slides. See if it'll let me. Let's start with that.
Go back a bit.
Yeah. All right. So whole way through. So this is the first movement again. Then we'll go through the full second movement, then the whole third movement. Or do you just want to hear the whole second movement? Because that's the only one we didn't hear the whole way through.
Maybe we should hear the whole second. Yeah, should we just do that?
Absolutely. And here we go. Here's the full second movement.
Amazing, amazing, wonderful. Thank you again for introducing us to such amazing music that we're really getting to the music featuring trombone and trumpet. So thanks again so much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.